Cheers.
Thank you, Simon, for that kind introduction. I was beginning to worry that my speech was going to be shorter than his introduction. You know, I'm going to start on abusing the audience for just 1 second. I've been waiting for years now to pay back something that somebody did to me at a Civicus World Conference in Botswana 3 years ago. And I'm going to do exactly what he did, but I'm going to do it the same way. So some of you might have a couple of questions in your mind. And the answer to the first question is no. The answer to the second question is no. The answer to the third question is yes. J. Naidoo is not my brother. J. Naidoo is not my uncle. J. Naidoo is a close comrade who I love and respect dearly. In honor of Elizabeth Taylor, who said to each of her 8 husbands, "Don't worry, darling, I won't keep you too long." I'm going to try and be much briefer than the very generous 30 minutes that I was allocated. To say that much of what I was going to say, you know, this used to be a very nice old tradition in the liberation struggle, you know, when you got onto a platform and if you were the last speaker, you started by saying, most of the really good points I want to make have been eloquently made by the previous comrades. And then you said, however, for emphasis, and then you spoke for about 2 hours. But seriously, dear brothers and sisters, and honored dignitaries, we are living in a tremendously scary time. As we gather here this evening, the people of Japan are in an absolute state of terror. It is true, of course, that earthquakes and tsunamis are not climate-induced, but I've just come from a meeting with the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Dr. Rajendra Pachauri, just 2 days ago, where he addressed the Greenpeace audience and said, but when we look at the height of those tsunami waves, there is grounds to actually look at whether, in fact, the size and scale of those waves were, in fact, partly related already to the phenomena of rising sea levels. But I don't want to depress you tonight. I want to actually speak about hope. And I want to say that the situation is dire, yes, just as it was when we were fighting the apartheid system, when there were many times all of us as South Africans actually felt we would never defeat the system. And even now, when we look at the level of urgency shown by those with real power in governments and even in the big global corporations, the urgency is not where it needs to be. But I cannot tell you how proud and happy I am this evening to say to you that in my work, I've probably been to about 100 countries in the last 4 years, pushing building the campaign around climate change. And I'm really pleased to say that there is no country in the world that actually has a climate change leadership awards that honors people from individuals to communities to companies. And I want to ask you to say a very, very big thank you to firstly Food and Trees for Africa for their vision, but also to the National Post Office, to Prime Media, to Pick and Pay, and to all the other sponsors for the vision that they've had to actually come together to generate this kind of recognition for real things that real people are doing, because every single recipient of these awards tonight are saying something that we used to say in the 80s. Remember, Reverend Alan Busak once said, you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And everybody who applied for these awards, those that got recognized, are sending a signal that's saying, we want to be part of the solution, and we will not vest entire faith in government or in somebody somewhere, or even in environmental organizations, but we are wanting to get involved and do direct, simple, powerful things that can make an impact in the communities where we live. So I really would once again ask you to thank all those sponsors for their vision, for their courage, and for actually not only setting an example for South Africa, but setting an example for the whole world, because I can tell you, everywhere I'm going to be going in the coming months, I'm going to be encouraging countries to launch climate change leadership awards like you have here. So I thought I should tell you, when I started at Greenpeace, given my background, which was much closer to the labor movement and to poverty and development than to the environment, a young activist came up to me and said, Kumi, we are wondering whether you're a watermelon. So I said, watermelon? And she said, yes, green on the outside, red on the inside. And the main question that media asked me when I was appointed was, there was a lot of fuss about me being the first person from a developing country and from Africa to head up Greenpeace and so on. And there was the question that I was posed was, you've been driving, working on the anti-poverty work, and now you're leaving poverty to go to the environment. And my dear brothers and sisters, the main message I'd like to say to you, because in a country that's coming out with the deep development deficits that we have given our history, we have to recognize that the struggle to prevent catastrophic climate change on the one hand, and the struggle to actually ensure serious, sustainable development and addressing poverty are two sides of the same coin. They do not have to be in contradiction with each other. Another person that was at this meeting that I've just come from was the new head of the global trade union movement. And I'm really pleased to say that she's the first woman to head up the global trade union movement. Her name is Sharon Burrows. She's from Australia. And she came there to work with me to convince my colleagues at Greenpeace to say what we need now is a red-green alliance, meaning a labor and environmental alliance, but where we talk about a just transition to a new economy. Let me explain what that means. Of course, as Greenpeace, we have been fighting these struggles for many, many years. And you can understand that when 20 years ago we told the world we have to take action against climate change, people laughed at us and said, what are you talking about? Okay, so we're happy now that people actually broadly agree that we need to do it. So you can understand the impatience, but we have to recognize that when we say to companies, you must move to a low-carbon business approach, we are not unmindful about what that means for companies to do that. And we understand better now that the trade union movement fully supports a low-carbon green economy in the future. But of course, they have a challenge to look at how do they transition their members who are workers from dirty energy jobs or jobs that are located in the fossil fuel complex to clean energy jobs. But here's the good optimistic story for Africa. Africa probably, as a continent, has one of the largest potentials in solar, in wind, in wave, in geothermal, in biomass. Collectively, if you look at all of those renewable technologies, we are not even harnessing 5% of the potential that we have. So we need to begin to recognize, on the one hand, that the South African government's leadership at the global level in terms of climate negotiations is very good. Without any doubt, I would say that if you made a list of 20 governments at the global climate negotiations that are really on the right side of history, the South African government is one of those 20. And I'm proud to say that. And being a good civil society person, after that, you follow by saying, however. And however, the South African government now has a huge opportunity not only to show global leadership, but to show global leadership in a way that people globally can be influenced, and particularly the powerful countries can actually be moved to do the right thing. We have a historic meeting that comes to our country at the end of this year. This is the 17th time governments will be coming together to try to agree a climate deal to actually save this planet for our children and grandchildren. And by the way, you will find that I rarely talk about saving the planet, saving the environment, saving the climate, because somehow that language doesn't seem to penetrate. What is at stake here, and all of us who are parents or grandparents actually need to understand that what is at stake here is securing the future of our children and grandchildren. And failure to act with the urgency that the situation calls for is not simply a betrayal of a right thing to do, but it's a betrayal of our very own children and grandchildren. That is what is at stake. And if you had any doubts about whether this is real, let's be very clear that the impacts are happening now, right? Kofi Annan, after he left the UN, set up a foundation that did a study that showed in 2008, 300,000 people lost their lives directly related to climate impacts. My colleague Michelle Ntab, who is the executive director of Greenpeace Africa and is based here in Johannesburg, she's from Senegal, makes the point that resource wars, because quite often we talk about resource wars, that in fact the future wars will not be fought about oil, the future wars will be fought about water and so on. More and more people are saying that, right? But always when we talk about resource wars, we imagine that it's going to happen sometime in the future. Let's look at Darfur for a second. What is Darfur? Of course, there was ethnic manipulation and so on, but Darfur and the violence and the genocide, or whatever your description for it is essentially a manifestation of one of the worst impacts of climate change that we are seeing. On the one end, we're having desertification. On the other side, Lake Chad is one of the largest inland seas in the world historically. As a result of climate impacts, it has shrunk to about a quarter of its size. Right? So water scarcity, land scarcity, and particularly land to grow food on, has been one of the biggest drivers of that conflict. And I should say to you, I've been waiting my entire life to start a sentence like the one that I'm about to start. I strongly agree with the CIA and the Pentagon, or elements therein, who say that the biggest threat to future peace and security is going to come from climate change.